Hello. Hope everyone's morning is off to a great start. I'm Ayushi Gupta, a graduate student at the Harvard Kennedy School and the programming chair at the Behavioral Insights Student Group. On behalf of my team, I'd like to welcome you all to another BISG event. A little bit about us. Launched in 2013 under the leadership of the faculty director Todd Rogers, BISG brings together Harvard's outstanding group of decision research scholars, behavioral economists, and behavioral scientists to focus on improving how decisions are made by leaders, organizations, and individuals alike. With a member base of over 2,000 people, BISG hosts events throughout the year for students and professionals interested in the powerful applications of behavioral insights. We're excited for you to join us for today's discussion. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to state some housekeeping rules. For the duration of this event, which is 1 hour, we'll have the last 15 to 20 minutes reserved for Q&A. So please use the Q&A box liberally to submit your questions for the speaker. Today, we are joined by Dr. Sunita Sah to discuss her new best-selling book, Defy. Moderating this talk is Professor Alison Fragale, who is no stranger to BISG. Professor Alison Fragale is an organizational psychologist and award-winning professor at the University of North Carolina's Kenan-Flagler Business School. She's renowned for her research on power, status, negotiation, and influence, and has been featured in top academic journals and media outlets like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Alison is also sought after keynote speaker and the author of the best-selling book, Likeable Badass, How Women Get Success They Deserve. Prior to her academic career, she worked as a management consulting for McKinsey and Company. She also holds a PhD in organizational behavior from Stanford University and a BA in mathematics and economics from Dartmouth College. It is so great to have you both with us. Professor Fragale was the first author we started our series with, and it is so great to have her back again as we are nearing the end of our book talk. And so over to you, Alison, to introduce our speaker.
Amazing. Well, thank you for having me back in this fun role to get to talk with Dr. Sunita Sah, who we have a lot of things in common, and then she's also gone above and beyond. We are both organizational psychologists. Sunita has her PhD from Carnegie Mellon, which Pittsburgh is my hometown. I don't know if we've ever chatted about that, and also holds a position at a business school at Cornell in the similar area. Unlike me, she's a doctor twice over, and is a medical doctor as well, and has written this book that we're here to talk about today. She has it behind her. I have it on my desk. Defy. It is amazing. We're going to unpack a ton of insights from it, but it is so awesome to chat with you, friend. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Alison. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited for our conversation.
How is your book whirlwind going?
Well, it's intense, but it's all good stuff. So it's been wonderful, really, to see the reception, and I'm having a lot of fun on the tour. I get to talk about something I'm very passionate about over and over again. So I do love that aspect of.
Amazing. I am so excited to talk with you because I love everything you're doing. Um, I I was always saying that writing a book is like, having a child for the first time, that you can talk to friends who have kids and you can read a lot of books about it. But until you've done it, you're like, oh, this is actually, an intense thing. So let's step back to what got you excited, led you to write the book in the first place. Is it a single moment? Aha. Is it a culmination of life and research? How did you get to this point?
I would definitely say life and research. So
Uh-huh.
even as a child, if you've delved into the book, you will know that I talk about having a masterclass in compliance. And I was really known for being an obedient daughter and a student. And I remember asking my dad when I was quite young, what does my name Sunita mean? And he said in Sanskrit, Sunita means good. And mostly I did live up to that. So I did what I was told, went to school as expected, did all my homework, even had my hair cut the way my parents wanted. And that is what I sort of equated with being good. Like it was, what does it mean to be good? It means to be polite, to fit in, to obey, to do as you're told, to not question authority. And that was the messages I received, not just from parents, but also from teachers and the community. And I think we often teach our children those messages, maybe girls more than boys. And so I was had this level of compliance, but I was fascinated by people that could defy. And I really wanted to look at that in more depth. And when I started doing my research, it was in kind of related areas, but very much like, how do people take bad advice? First of all, in the medical context, having worked as a physician and also being a patient in many situations, why do we find it so difficult to say no? And then it sort of delved into sort of other industries and just day-to-day life and interactions. I just became really interested in the amount of compliance that we have and the serious problems that really come up with the amount of compliance. And that's what got me to wonder, is it sometimes bad to be so good? And what do we actually sacrifice by being so compliant?
Amazing. So another thing you and I have in common is we both wrote books about concepts that are used in everyday speech, but the way that we talk about them might be different than the way someone might use it on the street. So in my case, status, but in your case, defiance. It's a word I use all the time, defy, defiance. But this is central to what you're talking about, is that the way that we might think about it, the dictionary definition is not fully capturing what you're trying to convey about this concept. So can we start there with,
Yeah.
in your world, what does it mean to defy?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started delving into some of the problems with compliance, I saw some serious issues. For example, sort of 9 out of 10 healthcare workers, most of them nurses, don't feel comfortable speaking up when they see a colleague or a physician making an error. And it's the same in other industries as well. So another survey, I think, of over 1,700 crew members on commercial airlines, 50% of them don't feel comfortable speaking up when they see a mistake. And these are situations where we really do want people speaking up. And it really got me thinking about influencer device and authority and studying that. And what I found that really changed how I think is that we've just simply misunderstood what it means to defy. So the old definition, or the Oxford English Dictionary definition of to defy, means to challenge the power of somebody else, so boldly and openly. And I think that's a little too narrow. I grew up in the UK, so I don't usually disagree with the Oxford English Dictionary, but in this case, I think we need another definition that really honors our agency. And so my definition of to defy is simply to act in accordance with your true values, especially when there is pressure to do otherwise. So it really transforms defiance from this negative connotation that people might have of defiance into this proactive, positive force in society.
Great. And so I want to like, your book is structured in these 3 sections, and I want to talk about all of them because they each are about really important things: a true yes, a true no, a moral maverick. But on the no piece, on defying, can you talk a bit about, is it an important distinction between defy or defiance and simply saying no? So I thought a lot, as I was thinking about this, of things in my space, and I do a lot of things related to women. And I was thinking about Lori Weingart and Linda Babcock's book about the No Club, and how women are often given more non-promotable work. And I thought about it, and I thought, like, is taking on non-promotable work in defiance, in conflict with a value? Or is it simply, this doesn't advance my career, it's good, there's nothing immoral about it, like someone has to plan the event, but if I do it, I'm not going to be able to achieve the goals I have in life. And so I'm going to say no to that. So can you help people think about the boundary between, is this defiance or is it simply saying no to something?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about my definition of defiance is to act in alignment with your values, then it comes back to, well, what are my values? Who am I? Which is, an important part of really becoming self-aware of who am I and what do I stand for? And so there are different elements. So the power of no could be to say no to non-promotable tasks. But where I distinguish is really, this is not just about saying no and using the word no when we want to just increase our productivity. It goes beyond that. It goes beyond, like, what is the type of society we want to cultivate? Because every single act that we do of consent, of dissent, of compliance really builds the society that we live in. And so like really honing in on like what is it that's important to me in terms of how do I want to live my values every day? How do I want to enact that? And that aspect of it is where I say if there is pressure to do otherwise and you want to act in alignment with your values, that's where it's defiance.
Great. So, okay, so can you talk true yes, and true no? And tell us
Sure.
a little bit about why the importance of those concepts for understanding and living this.
Yeah, so a true yes and a true no is true consent and true defiance or dissent. And I distinguish compliance and consent from each other because compliance is something that, like me, you might have as a default response. You slide into it without thinking, and it's usually externally imposed. So sometimes it can be done reluctantly. So it's a yes, that's not quite a yes, but it's coming from the environment, something external. Whereas consent or your true yes, I take the definition from medicine and I apply it to sort of other decisions that we can make in our lives. And to have informed consent in medicine, you need 5 elements. And they are, first of all, capacity. That is, you need to have the cognitive ability. So you're not under the influence of any drugs or alcohol, or you're not too sick to make a decision. So capacity is the first one. Then knowledge. So you need information about the decision that you're going to make. But having just the information is not enough. You need true understanding of that information. So a real grasp of the facts, um, the benefits, and any alternatives. It's cost benefits and alternatives, really. So we have capacity, knowledge, understanding. And then the fourth one is the freedom to say no. Because if you don't have the freedom to say no, then that's merely compliance. It's not consent. If you have those 4 elements, then the fifth element you can give is your authorization. So if you want to go along with it, that's your true yes, your informed consent. Or if you want to say no, that's your true no, your defiance.
Okay, excellent. And when you think about, there's a lot of stories of, I mean, you're such a good storyteller. There's so many stories of defiance in this book. I was curious, either one from the book, or I also expect that what's happened to you, similar to what's happened to me, is you talk about and spread these ideas more and more. New stories come to you, or things you've read or happened in the media, or a story that someone has shared with you that's not a public story. But when you think about a good prototypical story of defiance, is there one, like, do you have a favorite?
I actually love the story of my mum defying. And the reason I love this story so much is because when I was growing up, my mum was just the so represented to me compliance. You know, she is about 4'10" at the most, quite petite, and she always looked after everybody else's wishes. So she did all the cooking, the cleaning, the grocery shopping, and was always very self-subservient. But there was one day when I was a child, I was about 7 years old, and I was walking back from the grocery store with my mum, and she was pulling along the rickety shopping cart. It just looks like wheeled luggage, 2 wheels. And we were walking home, and it was quite a long walk back home. And we decided to take a shortcut through what we call a snicket in Yorkshire in England, which is really just a very narrow alleyway. And I was always told not to go through the snicket on my own as a child, but we decided together that we would go through the snicket to take the shortcut on the way home. And in that snicket, we were confronted by a group of teenage boys, and they blocked our path and they started shouting out some racist things to us and to go back home. Now, my reaction to those boys was instantaneous. I grabbed my mum's arm and I sort of wanted to avert my gaze, and I just wanted to walk as fast as possible and maneuver through the boys to get home. And I expected my mum to do the same thing. Now, she, as I said, she's very small, and she was wearing her blue-green sari at the time, and she had like her hair in one single plait at the back. And she actually stopped, and she did something different that really surprised me. She stopped and she looked at the boys directly in the eyes, and she said, "What do you mean?" And my heart started racing at that point, and I grabbed her arm even tighter and I whispered to her, "Come on, Ma." And then she shook me off. She said no. And she put the shopping cart up vertical and she put one hand on her hip. And she looked back at the boys again and said, "What do you mean?" And the boys didn't say anything. They just started looking at each other. And then she was like, oh, yeah, you think you're big, strong, tough boys, right? You think you're so clever. And she started telling them off in this broken English. And again, they didn't say anything. They just looked at each other until one of them said, let's go. And then they just dispersed. And then my mum grabbed the shopping cart and she walked really fast through that alleyway. And I just stood there stunned, like, what happened? And what that really showed me is that defiance isn't a personality trait. You don't, if you have a self-concept of being compliant, that's all right. We can choose to be defiant. It's a skill set and we can choose to use it or not. You can be compliant one day and defiant the next day. And even though compliance might be your default, it's not your destiny. And it was so powerful, that effect, because what I've found is that when you do defy, it transforms not only you, but the people who observe you. And so it has this ripple effect. And so many people now have told me stories about a moment they'd seen their parents defying and what an impact it had on their lives.
Amazing. I love that story. And so that brings me to two questions I've been really curious to ask you. And you talk about both of them in the book, but I wanted to dive into them. And first is this idea between parent and child. Parent and child, a lot of your stories talk about your upbringing, what you've seen your parents do. And I thought about this when I was early on reading your book, and then you get to it later. I thought about, as a parent of 3 kids myself, like, I got a lot of defiance in the way that the Oxford English Dictionary would define the term. No, 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 I'm not doing this. And so when I say, do your homework, don't play video games, brush your teeth, it's time for bed. And they're like, nope, nope, nope. But what you would say in that case is you use this term false defiance, which is it's not what you're asking them to do is by no means in conflict with their values. They probably value ultimately the same things you do. They may not know what their values are yet because they're little, but you're not asking them to make this kind of choice. So you talk about it as false defiance, but you also talk about this idea that, many kids, you, me, and probably how, I think I parent a lot of my own kids, obedience, good, defiance, bad. And
Right.
so how do you navigate this as a parent to try to introduce the concept of like living in accordance with your values without being able to say, like, you can just say no whenever you want, and that's fine?
Yeah, so great questions. And I have been fascinated by the parenting aspect and other aspects. Like even in the story that I told you, what I find really interesting was that I was the one, like it was almost like a role reversal, right? I was the one that wanted to be compliant and my mum was defying, and I was horrified about that aspect. But the false defiance is really fascinating because anyone who has children knows the reason I call some of the things that children do false defiance is that if you ask, if I ask my teenage son, to stop playing a video game and do his homework, and then like there's this phrase, and I don't know if your children say it to me, but it's been sort of ingrained in me is like, oh, I was going to do that, but now that you've told me, I'm not going to do it. Or they do the exact opposite of what you tell them to do. So it's oppositional, and many people would define that as defiance. Now, I say it's false defiance because if we're defining a true yes and a true no as being coming from within, like this thoroughly considered authorization, that's an active expression of our deeply held values. When somebody does the exact opposite of what you tell them, they're actually listening very intently to what you want. And so it is externally imposed. So it might look like defiance, but it's not true defiance. It's false defiance. So it's really important to distinguish between what is true defiance and false defiance. If you are, again, just reacting externally to the situation, that's not true defiance. So what can we do as parents? I actually think children do have some values that are deeply ingrained. Like they're really, really great at knowing what's fair or not, especially if they have siblings, right? That's fair, that's not fair, And so fairness is probably one of those values that they can identify with at a pretty young age. And so in terms of what we tell them is like, if you see like maybe one of your classmates being excluded or something like that, and of somebody being mean to them, then that is a situation where you can speak up and you can say something. And I know my editor, when she was reading early drafts of my book, and she has like young twins, she did a family values exercise with them. What are the values that are really important to me? Kindness, fairness, all those kind of things, and how can we live up to them? And I think this aspect of what is a way that we can say something if somebody does something unfair at school, what can we do? Or if the teacher asks you to do something that would hurt maybe another child or doesn't understand the situation, how can we speak up in those situations? And this is because we get so much training in compliance, like as a child. We don't think about training our children for defiance, and we need to do that too. Yes, it's important to listen to adults at various points in our lives, but it's also important to sort of identify situations which are unfair or go against our values, and how can we encourage our children to do that?
Absolutely. And so on that note, and related to the story you told about your mom, of this idea that is another thing we have in common, is that these things that can feel hard to do for adults are practiced skills. They are not something that any human being is necessarily born with. And certainly socialization can make it feel even harder, but we get better with practice. And so as I was reading, one of the things I was thinking about was, because I come from the area of teaching a lot about negotiation and influence, I always tell people that the right place to go and practice is at the airport. Because at the airport, there's always something that goes wrong. And so there's always something you can negotiate for. And if it goes sideways, you'll never see those people again. But then I thought, the airport's probably not the best place to practice defiance. Like, I feel like the airport is like a lesson in compliance. Like, you do what people tell you, otherwise you get arrested and you don't get on the plane. So how do you, to people who say, I want to practice this, I want to practice, whether that's, I want to help my kid practice, I want to practice myself, what thoughts or advice do you have to people on how to start the practice?
I would say start small then, and I like that aspect that you also talk about in terms of practicing. Here's low risk, medium risk, high risk. So start with something small that's very low risk. And even though we're not talking really about values in this situation, you can practice saying no to just things like um, an appointment you don't want to go to, a meeting that you don't want to go to, and it's not necessary for you to go to. So somebody who sort of crosses your boundaries or asks you to do something you'd rather not do, or even speaking up with a hairdresser, which is my problem, right? That when you're at the hairdresser and they're saying, trust me, and they're cutting away, and you're thinking, stop, 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 but it's very hard for you to say stop. It's just practicing in those situations, telling them that your food is bad in a restaurant. And those little things really build up our ability to be able to say no. Um, but as I said, the very first step is thinking about what your values are and identifying with those. And it's incredibly important. And the research actually shows if you write down what your values are and why they are important to you, and I have my executive students do this in every leadership class, then the research shows they're more likely that the intended behaviors, how they wish that they would behave in a situation, is more likely to occur. Because one of the things that we have is that we believe we're going to act in a certain way. We believe we're going to speak up. We believe that we're not going to be like those people that couldn't do something. But when we're actually in the situation, we either freeze, we're unprepared because we haven't practiced. And so the practice becomes long before the moment of crisis. So start with small behaviors, know what your values are, clarify your values, write them down, and then just keep on practicing. Have some scripts in your back pocket that are really useful. Like what my mum said in that situation, what do you mean? I think that's a wonderful script to have. You could be in a meeting and you know that somebody's going to say something inappropriate because you've been in that meeting with that particular person many times in the past, and they always say something at somebody else's expense. So you can just say, what do you mean by that? And that actually makes a big difference because it raises the volume on the situation. Maybe they change their behavior, maybe they don't, but they think twice about saying it again in your presence, or maybe the other people that are there. Plus, it sent a message to the other people that are in the meeting who then can also ask the same thing, even when you're not there. So it's just set out this little ripple effect, just that one little statement. So start small.
Okay, I swear to everyone watching, we did not plan this, but that could not have, this question that I really wanted to ask you could not have set segued into that more perfectly. Thinking about how to defy, that your language or your action matters. So, you tell the story in the book about being in the hospital and they're recommending a medical procedure for you that you, as a trained physician, know is probably not needed because of your symptoms, but you're compliant. And I could imagine, like, if you were going to defy, you can imagine defying in a variety of different ways. Like, you could scream and get angry and blah, blah, blah. Or you could say, hey, and you can lay out your argument about, hey, I know that the symptoms for this, condition are A, B, and C. I don't have any of B and C. That would probably be received differently. So, are there other scripts or advice when people practice the language of defiance? And like one thing I often hear, I'm sure you see the same thing on social, is people will say no is a complete sentence. And I'm like, that's technically correct, but it's not the most relationship building way to tell someone no. If you just walk around being like, no, 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 I wouldn't advise that as a relationship building strategy. It's not, you can't ever use it. Different language could convey the exact same thing and get you a better outcome, because not all outcomes of defiance are created equal. So anyway, have you found any other phrases, language, advice to help people practice that defiance?
Yeah, so I love that. I keep hearing that as well. Like, no is a complete sentence, and we can just start imagining, right? What if I was in that meeting and somebody said something inappropriate? What if I just said no? So one of the things, there are some useful scripts, such as, what do you mean by that? Oh, can you clarify this? Have you considered this? But one of the most useful things when I talk about practice is this anticipation aspect, is that a lot of things about defiance is that we think we need to get it right every single time. But even if you think about the sort of famous Rosa Parks no on the bus, I'm not going to move, it was preceded by hundreds of moments of compliance. She didn't say no every time she went on a bus. She obeyed segregation laws a lot of times. So we are often very compliant before the moment of defiance, and we often regret those situations, or they weigh on our minds. And we often, like, how many times have I sat in a meeting and somebody has said something and I want to say something, but I don't say something. And then I think about it, I ruminate on it. Why couldn't I have said something in the moment? And so this aspect of anticipation is really important, because we want to anticipate the most common situations that we need to defy, because they come up time and time again. We're always going to get asked to do this. I always say yes to this particular thing. So anticipate it and then visualize it, because then we can start role playing and scripting. So rather than, we can have a few scripts in our back pockets, but we probably have our own scripts that are more unique and personal to us. So script it out. And then when you start role playing and practicing, that's the thing that changes the neural pathways. And so, we can get used to saying those words, and our ears used to hearing them, because if we have never done it before, it feels so unnatural. And I always keep that quote by, that's always attributed to Bruce Lee, but it's actually a Greek poet. Under duress, we don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. And so just practicing, anticipating, visualizing, role script, and deciding what you're most comfortable saying. And yes, it doesn't have to be confrontation. It can be curiosity, not confrontation. That's what I always say.
Yeah, that's so wise, because I think a lot of things that we encounter are not surprised. They're only surprises because we haven't thought about them. It may not have predicted it would occur that very second, but that idea that that thing would happen, like that colleague would say something that was inappropriate. It's not like it hasn't happened before, and so you could predict that. And I think that's really, really wise and great advice. Okay, there's questions coming in too, and so we need to turn to Moral Maverick as much as I could talk about this, just because we need to explain that as a third important section of the book. So can you talk about becoming a moral maverick and how we can create big changes through small behaviors?
Absolutely. So what is a moral maverick? It's somebody who can speak up and act when it matters most. And you don't need to get it right every time. It's a work in progress, and we can all work towards that aspect. So how do we get there? So the first step is very much, who am I and what are my values, and learning how, like, there's various different ways that we can really understand what's most important to us. And then the second question on this defiance compass that I have is, what type of situation is this? So we're looking now externally. Is it safe? Is it effective for me to defy? Because we want to make sure it's the right time and place to defy. Sometimes that might not be the right time and place. We might want to defer defiance to another day. We might want to engage in what I call conscious compliance, is that it's not the kind of compliance that we slide into, but we have all the elements for consent. We have the capacity, knowledge, understanding, freedom to say no, but we decide in that situation that the costs are too great or the benefits are too meager, and we're going to consciously comply. So who am I? What type of situation is this? And then what does a person like me do in a situation like that? That's the final question. And it's such an important one because it really taps into our responsibility. Like, again, going back to what are our values? What does a person like me with these values for integrity, for fairness, for compassion, whatever your values are that you've identified, what does that type of person do in a situation like this? So we tap into our aspirational selves so we can actually decrease that gap between what we want to do and what we actually do in the situation, because so many people really sort of who they think they are is very different from how they behave, and we've got to kind of diminish that gap, because what you do in that situation leads back to the first question on the Defiance Compass: who am I? So how you act really becomes who you are, and not just how you wish you could act in that situation. And taking that Defiance Compass has been really helpful for me as the path towards becoming a moral maverick, and to be able to do the right thing in the moment and be prepared for that.
Yeah, I will tell you that part of the book, I really was thinking about it this week, because I confronted this situation, and I thought, oh, okay, what would Sunita say about this? And I think I know based on this. The story is not going to reflect well in Chicago, but basically, I was walking where I live in Chicago in the middle of the day at noon on my block, and I see somebody steal an Amazon package off someone else's porch. Bright sunlight, middle of the day. And I can see him coming, and I get kind of an uneasy feeling about him as he's coming. He's wearing like mirrored sunglasses, and he's just looking like he's kind of looking around, and it's just him and I. And he goes up on the porch, he steals the package, and he comes back down, and he walks right by me. And I, 1 second, and I just walked by. And he'd had his hand in his other pocket, and I felt bad about it. And I called my husband, and I said, back to this idea, I was compliant. And I said, but I didn't want to get hurt because that happens. And my husband basically, said, I think that's fine. He said, you didn't see a kid pulled into a van. He said, it's not worth dying over someone's paper towels, and, it's fine, let it be. But then there had been, it was again, the stories that you can only hear in Chicago, a murder in my neighborhood the night before, which was not super close. But I found out the next day, because it was on the news, that the murderer confronted two people stealing packages, and they killed the person. And so I felt very validated in I'm just going to walk by. But when I was like feeling guilty, and then I thought about your book, and I thought, wait a second, what kind of situation is this? And I thought, it's definitely against my values. At the same time, given the benefit of I don't know, whatever is in that box, but how good could it possibly be? I'm going to let this go. And I will tell you that I say this as a thank you to you, because I was feeling really, really bad about it until I thought about it in the context of what you were talking about. And I was thinking it wasn't a moral judgment about me to conduct a cost benefit analysis to say in this moment, defiance may not be worth it relative to what you could gain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear so much of this now when I'm talking about defiance, and people have written to me, oh, this incident happened, at the cinema, and somebody was shouting at my daughter, and I didn't say anything, and I feel so guilty about it, but he looked so crazy. And I was like, well, is it safe? Is an important question,
Right.
for a lot of people. And what do you know about that situation? You don't know anything about the person that is doing that. So if you knew him, or this was happening again and again, you might have a different way of approaching. You might have been able to take a photo or something like that. There's many different ways to defy, and you can also practice what I call quiet defiance, which doesn't involve the confrontational aspect. But yeah, I think that was the safest thing for you to do in that situation.
Yeah, I'm okay with it now, but I just wanted to say that reflected through what you taught me and what I learned through the book, it gave me a different way to process it rather than carrying guilt about being a good person or a bad person. And I really appreciated that. There are a lot of questions. Oh my God, people, always ask brilliant questions in these kind of sessions. All right, so I'm going to turn to a couple of questions. Let's see, no particular. A lot of them have to do with things in organizations. So one of them that came in was, Well, how do you think about whistleblowers who are calling out a wrongdoing? Would you say that whistleblowing is an act of defiance, or do you think about whistleblowing as separate from defiance?
I think it's absolutely an act of defiance. And I describe a few whistleblowers in the book as well, and some of the costs of whistleblowing, because we do need to be aware when we were talking about what's the cost, is it safe, is it effective? And, you know, those questions are very important when you're thinking about defying or not. But that doesn't mean that's the only thing, right? That if you're, it's never going to be perfectly safe to defy. And often we can't predict how effective it is. Like, I mean, if we go back to Rosa Parks, was it safe? Well, actually, no, it wasn't very safe for her to defy at all. You know, she received death threats. She had so many costs from that moment of saying no on the bus. She lost a job, you know, and I portray these costs to make you see that, you know, these people are not superhuman. They still have the costs of defiance. It's, is it safe enough to us, right? It's a very individual decision. Is it safe enough? Will it be effective enough? And they are very personal, individual decisions that we need to take. And just being understanding that we're not acting on emotion, but some of the things, Rosa Parks didn't act emotionally, but it was based on some emotion, but it was also very strategic. And thinking about those things, whistleblowers, of course, we don't have enough protection for whistleblowers. We have some, but not all. And the whistleblowers that I spoke to, they said that they don't regret what they did, even though they did have a lot of costs. Maybe they would have done things in a slightly different way. And I described those, but they don't regret it because it was really important to them. So sometimes people will defy based on how strong their values are in that situation, regardless of the costs.
Absolutely, yeah. Um, the Okay, so let me. I'm making a decision of
Oh,
order
the
here.
other thing about
Go
whistleblowers
ahead.
as well, I will say that, you know, people often sort of think of them as troublemakers. I would actually say these are the people that really do have strong values and they really care about the organizations that they're working, that they're not living up to the values and the mission that they claim to. And so they often they are very principled, many of them. And so thinking about it in that way, of course, it is defiance. It requires a lot. So I'm not saying everyone should be a whistleblower. Again, it's a very personal decision, but it is amazing. Like we need those whistleblowers.
So, yeah, absolutely. And on the one of the questions that came in, I think, is on the flip side of that is, if you're in a position of authority, how can you encourage defiance? You know, either define straight to you, right? That you could define me, or that you could be defined in this organization like a whistleblower if you see something. So how can we try to cultivate and create a sense of safety and defiance for people when we are the high power, high status person?
Yeah. Um, so many ways, right? How can we create an environment that's first of all psychologically safe for people to speak up? And like if we take those two questions, is it safe? Showing that it's safe for people to speak up. And then if somebody does speak up, actually doing something about it. So showing that it's going to be effective, even if it's not completely the outcome that people want, showing sort of the procedural aspect that they're taking it seriously, they're doing what they can. And then also modeling defiance, like to the people above, if something needs changing, being able to speak up. So modeling defiance is great. And then creating that environment where you actually welcome that and understanding that if everybody is so compliant and nobody does anything beyond this sort of conformity aspect, you're going to get no innovation, no creativity. And you actually want to be told if you're going to make a mistake in something. You don't want everyone just be, yes, boss, you know. So.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that it's also so important to recognize the power of our own actions to shape how other people behave. I feel like there's a lot of context in human behavior where we want to train somebody else to do something that we ourselves are not comfortable doing. And I say, if you can't, if you, it's obvious that you're not comfortable doing it, it's pretty hard for you to message that this is a good thing to be doing. And so if nothing
Right.
else, the idea of starting with oneself and practicing defiance is in itself a teaching moment as you
Yes.
talk about it to help people understand that it is safe to defy. I love
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Okay, one other thing related to that is this. Back to thinking about running organizations and how do you keep, either a society at large or a business specifically running if you have the way that the question was phrased, like, if there's too much defiance to authority, I think here's where this idea of defiance versus simply saying no to things comes in. But how do you balance the idea that if we're going to collaborate, we need some compliance to some shared set of goals and norms and things like that, while still allowing people to defy without having anarchy?
Yes, I mean, I think if we go back to sort of what do we mean by defiance and not just being oppositional, I mean, sometimes it's really helpful actually when you're trying to make decisions and think through things is to think about like, the opposite hypothesis or even play devil's advocate, especially with critical thinking. Sometimes you want that. So sometimes, you want to encourage that type of defiance where, you get the creativity, but it's not false defiance or oppositional, that aspect of defiance and realize it is a good thing. So if you have like sort of defiance the way I define it, I don't think you can have too much of that. We have cooperation, which is very different to sort of just complying sort of externally. We cooperate with people all the time, and we need that level of cooperation to get things done. Defiance isn't about getting your own way every single time. It's not about that, oh, I prefer this option. It's about speaking up. It's about doing something when some of your important values are being violated in a way, and making sure that those values are enacted and that you can enact them on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, coming back time and again to what are the values,
Yes.
100%. You talk in the book about systemically marginalized groups or individuals, and there's a question that came in about women, but I think it could be extended for everyone. Like, how do you, I think this relates to this idea of what's the situation and what's the context, but how do you like think about advising people based on ascribed status characteristics or power in a group or things like that to think about, is it safe to define, not necessarily safe physically or perhaps physically, but,
Mhm.
but even safe from a, consequences part? Would this have consequences that are outside? Do I get fired, right? Do I get talked badly about in my industry so I can never get a job again, whatever? How do you, when you layer in the status and power dynamics, any
Yes,
thoughts there?
yes, absolutely right. So there is what I call a defiance hierarchy, that some people are allowed to defy more than other people. And we really do need to be aware of that because there's a double whammy. And so, like, some people that are expected to comply more, and there's more of a backlash if you defy. Not only that, those people, because they're expected to comply more, need to actually defy more, right? So there is this aspect where it's a burden on some people that the level of compliance that's expected of them versus how their defiance is interpreted for other people. So we should take that into account. Like, even now, what is my personal risk? It's good to know what is your personal risk from, if you defy, it might be higher than somebody else doing the exact same thing as you within an organization. And so we shouldn't really expect the people that it is harder to defy or have more costs to defy to take care of everything. Really, it should be the people that are creating the environment that should create the right environment. That doesn't mean that we can't equip ourselves with those things, but it's really to think about, what can I do if you're in a more senior, more privileged position, what can we do to help the people with less power, with less status, and that have those characteristics that they're falling sort of lower down on the defiance hierarchy.
Absolutely, yes, to share that responsibility and not, put it all on them. I love that. This I think was a really interesting question about, and sometimes, I'm really curious, when you do enough of these, you're like, there's no question I've never seen before, but I'm like, have you seen this one before? I don't know. The concept of humility in defiance. And so examples that come to mind might be January 6th protesters or people who refused vaccines. They seem like they're defying consistently with their values, but they're mistaken, from this person's perspective, in the accuracy about the state of the world. And so, I get what they're talking about. So how can you think about humility or self-awareness in what you're defying so that you can be using your defiance to create more good in the world?
So when we come back to what is a true yes and what is a true no, what is that defiance, we go back to what are the elements needed for your true yes and your true no. And it comes back to knowledge and understanding. Do we have the knowledge and understanding? Because when we're talking about the medical scan that I knew was not right for me, the reason I knew that is because I had the knowledge and understanding. And it's to really ask yourself, do we have that? And it's becoming more and more difficult in today's world, right? To know what's fake information, what's true. And we need to think about the source and really ascertain what is, like, do we really have the knowledge and the understanding, a true grasp of the facts? And then with your values, are you living up to them? So yes, in the January 6th sort of attack of the Capitol, there might have been some people that truly believed they were acting on their values. There's also people that believed the election was fair. They don't believe in violence, but they got swept up with the crowd, right? Which is what I would call false defiance. So really thinking about, do I have the correct knowledge and understanding, and is this representing my true values?
That's a really important point. Which again also makes you understand why there's so much compliance in medicine, as you use that example, because it's an area where so many people, even with the internet, which I don't know if it helps you, you feel so underinformed because you lack so much knowledge. Yeah.
Exactly. And in medicine, we want to have trust in medicine and physicians, because it would be such a shame if we didn't have that. And they know so much more than we do, right? We can't go to medical school and get all the knowledge that they have. I mean, it's good to look things up and ask questions for sure, but it's also very, very difficult. Even for me, with the knowledge and understanding, what kept me silent was this psychological process I call insinuation anxiety, that we don't want to imply that the other person can't be trusted. And we have anxiety about that, sort of telling someone else, giving them a negative signal that we think that they're incompetent, untrustworthy, they're racist or sexist. We don't want to say that. And that's often the thing that keeps us silent. So really understanding the insinuation anxiety helps, first of all, just naming that feeling, that tension that we have. And then taking some distance from it, like what can I do that doesn't imply that the other person is untrustworthy, but really states what I think is the right thing to do in this situation.
Yeah, no, that's so right. That concern that it's like a face threat to them, or
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
a
you
threat
want
to
to
their
save their
sanity.
face. Yeah, and I find that so interesting, because like when you think about integrity, right, and honesty, it's a value that so many people say they have. Like, even with my students, if I ask them to rate themselves on the level of honesty between 0 to 100 to everyone else in the room, where 50 is the average, they'll all say 85, 90. It's really important to them. But then when they're in a situation, and we can go back to one where it's a faculty meeting, there's a junior woman on this committee with 4 senior men evaluating grants, and there's one applicant. When it comes to that applicant, it's a Black man. She said the conversation changed and it seemed more to go to negative gossip than the quality of the application and the credentials. And she said that the one thing that she wanted to say was what she couldn't say, that she didn't want to challenge their integrity, having met them for the first time. That is classic insinuation anxiety. We want to save their face. We don't want to imply that they're doing something wrong, that they could be racist or they lack integrity. And so we keep quiet. We don't say anything. And by doing that, we actually dilute our own integrity, our own values, by not sort of saying something in that particular moment. So really understanding that aspect of insinuation anxiety, I'm trying to save their face, naming it can help us manage that emotion.
Yeah, that reminded me of something, and maybe this is helpful for people in terms of thinking about language for this, is that as you and I, as researchers and scientists, we're often able to go back to make arguments based on what we know of science from our field. And it can be a good way to depersonalize things that are happening. So I remember one thing that happened to me, different but similar, which is I was in my role as a professor, as a dean of a program, negotiating with a female faculty member about teaching in the program. She had a lot of things she wanted in exchange for teaching. So we're negotiating. There's a male co-dean, aside here, and basically says, I'm getting really tired of negotiating with this female faculty member. Like, I feel like she's just asking for too much and pushing. And so similar idea of basically saying you're making an ascribed status comment about this.
Yes.
But what I was able to say in this context, which I think was helpful, and it might be helpful for other people, was not that was bad on you, but to say, I actually said, I don't disagree with you. I'm getting a little frustrated as well. However, I think we both need to recognize the science that we understand of the backlash toward women when they advocate for themselves, that we are much more likely to view the same behavior in a more negative light. And neither you nor I will ever know if we would have thought about this differently if we'd been negotiating with a male colleague. But I think we need to like really check that bias. And what I found was we were both like, we don't know, but it was enough to be able to say, let's think about this a different way and let's focus on the problem we have. And so in that context like that, something like not this is bad for you, but we know that human beings tend to do X, right? And that
Yes.
they tend to pay attention to these factors in different ways, even though they shouldn't. And I think that that could be really important. So going back to evidence-based things and things that human beings do rather than people do, I have found that in those contexts to be something that allows the other people to experience it with less criticism. And in case that's useful for people, you know, I feel like that's been a privilege of the work that I do, is I'm often able to cite those kinds of arguments as a way to defy. All right, I know we're getting so close to the end. You and I could talk for days. I wanted to ask you, is there something that got cut from your book in the editing process that you still miss or remember or wish it was there and this would be your chance to share it?
Oh, wow. So many things got cut.
I know.
I could have written for a long time on that. Um, so I had a whole chapter on how we rationalize to ourselves. And I think it was the right thing to do, probably, to take it out, but like how we basically lie to ourselves about certain things. So if we have these values, like why why can't we live up to them? And how do we convince ourselves that we're doing the right thing when we're not actually doing the right thing? So it's sort of a level of self-deception that we have that, first of all, well, I wouldn't have behaved in that situation the way that that other person behaved. So we have this like positive sort of forecasting of how we'll behave in a certain situation. And when we don't, we have all these rationalizations about it's not because, this statement that here that I do still have in the book that I think is really important one, like, this is not me, like when we start doing things that we don't think is the right thing to do, but we don't quite know how to do the right thing. And then we just sort of say, this is not me. But if you hear yourself saying that a lot of the times, you might want to think, well, it is you if you are doing it over and over again. And yeah, like the distance between who we think we are and what we actually do is enormous. So I did have a lot on rationalizations. I had an amazing story about someone a pilot that actually dropped the atomic bomb in World War II, and sort of how he had rationalized at the time, and then how he came, then he was tormented by the fact that he had done this and became an advocate for not doing this. And yeah, I was really fascinated by that story, but it did get cut. So maybe I'll put it together.
I'm glad you got to tell it, at least part of it now. All right, so we're gonna wrap up, but I was gonna give you the last word as we did. You're amazing. I cannot be more grateful to share this hour with you, and I'm sure everyone else feels the same. All right, last word. If people take one thing from today or your book, what's the thing you want them to take?
Oh, so first of all, let's have a mindset shift about what defiance actually means. So we think that we have to be a particular type of person, that we think that we have to be loud or aggressive or violent, or that we have to be superhuman and heroic. And you don't need to be any of those things. It actually makes you more yourself. So being defiant is something that's available and actually necessary for all of us. It's a skill set, it's a practice, not a personality. So please do take that away with you.
I love that. Sunita, thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison. This is so wonderful to do with you.
What a wonderful note to end this conversation with. Thank you so much, Dr. Sah, for your insights into the power of principled defiance and the courage to say no. I'm sure this talk has provided us with valuable tools to navigate ethical challenges that we might face in our professional as well as in our personal lives. And a special thanks to Professor Alison Fragale for moderating this discussion with so much thoughtfulness and depth. We also appreciate and thank all the audience for their active participation and insightful questions. We hope this session has inspired you to embrace your inner moral maverick and to stand firm in your convictions. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, and we'd see you for the next one.
Thank you.